Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm gonna show you my round 4 game from the Dubrovnik Advent Open. So I came home yesterday and I was in a bus for 10 hours, so I finally had some time to analyze. And I haven't engine checked the game, but I have done my own analysis, and at the end of the video, we're going to engine check the game. So I would like to first of all say that the tournament was amazing. The organizers were great. Anna, who actually invited me to come and play, she was the main organizer, was great. And I mean, if you haven't been to Dubrovnik yet and you play chess, consider going to the Advent Open next year. Other than the fact that it's 60 plus 30, which isn't, well, it's actually the first time I played this time control. Everything else was ideal. So, after having messed up a great position, a winning position in round 3, I faced another low-rated opponent in round 4. And my opponent plays the same thing in almost every game. So the prep was kind of easy, I want to say. So usually after d4, d5, my opponent plays e3 and then goes for a Stonewall with bishop d3, f4, and c3, and just plays the Stonewall with white in every game. So I had to decide on a setup. I actually have faced the reverse Stonewall a couple of times, and I think I have one draw and everything else, every other game I won. So I was feeling quite good about this. Before I show you the game, I want to show you something else. We'll be back to the game in a second. There's something I want to show you. I had a bot made in my image. So if you can see here, there's a bot called HPY on a website called Chessiverse, and Chessiverse is the sponsor of today's video. I would like to thank them, and I would like to show you what they do. So first of all, Chessiverse is a place where you can play a number of different bots, more than 500. You can choose the rating you play against, you can choose the style of the bot. If you go to, let's say, explore bots, you can see which bots you've played, but more importantly, you can see their style and everything else. So let's say we go to Tess Tacticelli, probably. She's a Guardian, which means that Guardians are the most defensive bots. They focus on protecting their pieces and safeguard their king. I have to say, I'm not too happy that I was that I'm a Guardian as well. So my bot is a Guardian too. As you can see, there are literally 500 bots. So you can play whichever bot you want. Now let's look at mine. So if we go to my profile, they gave me a rating of 2085. I'm a Guardian. Obviously, some prowess in endgames, and then in the opening, I got a 10, which I think is the highest score. Blunders, very bad, so I blunder a lot. Temperament, very low. Playstyle 3. So yeah, let's try to play against me. I played one game against myself and actually lost. So let's do a timed game 3+2. Okay, I resign. Yeah, my bot destroyed me like a boss. Okay, I hope you guys like this. Oh my god. I have to say, the assessment of my bot being a Guardian based on this game seems slightly off. But okay. Anyway, so you can play different bots. I mean, you can play me. My bot will be... you can play it for about a week. Then it will be locked for premium users only. So yeah, feel free to play against me and let me know if you manage to beat me. You can play other bots too, but there are more things you can do on Chessiverse. You can practice different positions, you can practice custom positions, you can practice positions from specific openings. You can actually go to different motifs like the Greek Gift, the IQP, and that's, I think, a great thing. Another thing I've tried is you can play out, well, I've played one of Bobby Fischer's games. You can play out famous positions played by famous players, and this is, I have to say, my favorite part, because it's less hassle. You just, you know, you get that position and you play it out. Also, there are famous endgames you can play out. So this is a great place to practice chess. There are also puzzles, and each bot will give you a couple of puzzles. I solved one with the advanced bots. I don't know which one. So yeah, you can get, okay, yeah, 1 out of 4,320. So yeah, you don't get all of this with the basic account. You have to upgrade to premium. With the basic account, you can play against the 10 or 12 free bots, but I think the premium is worth it. In any case, Chessiverse is a really, really fun new platform. I hope you try it out. I hope you don't manage to beat my bot, I have to say. If you want to check out Chessiverse, follow the link in the description. And yeah, I want to take them once again. Let's go back to the video. Bye-bye. Okay, so my opponent started with pawn to f4, which is, well, going for the same opening, obviously, the Stonewall, but via a different move order. And I could have gone, I went knight f6 first, and on knight f3, I could have gone bishop f5 to simply prevent e3, bishop d3. But I wanted to stick to the setup that I knew and that I enjoyed playing, which was c5 straight away. And now this pawn can be taken. There are many, many lines where white takes the pawn and is almost equal, but I had something prepared for that. My opponent didn't take, and I haven't expected him to take. He played e3. And once again, I can go bishop f5, which prevents bishop d3, which may have confused my opponent. But again, I wanted to stick to my setup. So I went knight c6. My opponent went c3. And now again, I can go bishop f5, but I had decided to go bishop g4. Okay, bishop d3, e6. Of course, one more time, dc is possible. And in this exact position, I can actually go knight e4. And on b4, I can go g6. And this gets very, very scary for my opponent. I mean, the engine, I think I still had this position on my board. And the engine, I think, for this one said black was slightly better, but it was close to equal. But I honestly don't think white can survive this without either very good prep or without being extremely good at calculation. Because the best move here is knight bd2, just giving up the pawn, which is very strange. And this much I knew. I can take on c3, and on queen b3, I can go bishop g7. That was the end of my prep. Seems awful for white. But instead, as expected, my opponent went bishop d3. Okay, I went e6, knight bd2, bishop d6. Now we are in a very, very standard setup for black. This is one of the main setups. My opponent surprised me with queen a4. And I was on my own here. So I had my first think of the game. So there were two options in my mind. Either castles and giving up the pawn with huge initiative, or queen b6, holding on to the b pawn and just getting a very good position. That's what I thought. We're going to turn on the engine and see what's better after I go through the game. So first of all, let's look at castles and this pawn sacrifice. Knight e5 is the point, double attack on the b7 pawn, or sorry, on the knight, but basically winning the b pawn or the bishop. And I would have gone bishop f5, where my opponent either takes or knight e5 is pointless, so takes. And now let's assume they take the b pawn. I thought this was really good for me. If c takes d4, then c takes d4, queen e7. And I'm attacking the e pawn. My opponent has to defend. If something like knight f3, then I have bishop b4, rook c8, queen e3, rook takes c1. It seemed almost losing for white, this position, maybe even losing. So I don't think my opponent can take the pawn. So on bc6, I think they just castle. And I wasn't sure whether this was so great for me. The knight's coming to f3 and to e5 eventually, and then this pawn is going to be a weakness. So I decided to go queen b6. And the reason I went queen b6 and not queen c7 or something else is because I want to keep control over my a pawn, so that on rook c8, queen takes a7 isn't possible. Or on bishop b5, rook c8, queen takes a7 isn't possible. So this frees up the c8 square for my rook, defends my a pawn, defends the knight, and on knight e5, which is what my opponent played, I can go bishop f5. And of course, if the bishops are traded off, then I think black should be positionally much better, because I can eventually play f6 and e3 is going to be a permanent weakness. DC is never playable because there's too much pressure on e3. So as expected, once again, my opponent played bishop b5 and I went rook c8. Now you can see why it's useful to have my queen on b6 and not on c7. If my queen was on c7 here, white would be threatening queen takes pawn. And now everything is just safe. White castles, black castles, knight df3. And here I had the second long thing in the game. As you can see, the bishop on b5 is misplaced. So if I go c4, probably the bishop has to take immediately, because I'm simply threatening to go a6 or even knight b8 and just trap the bishop. So let's look at a random move. I don't know, here, knight b8, that's it. You're going to lose the bishop because you don't have a single square for the bishop, and I'll just play a6 and win the bishop. So on c4, probably bishop c6 is forced and bc6. And again, I wasn't sure about this. I had no idea whether this was so great for me. It's hard for white to develop the bishop, but especially because there's no rook b1. But maybe there's a way out with b3 eventually. So I decided to prepare that by playing knight e7. And knight e7 means that on c4, you don't have bishop c6. You have bishop d7, but I can play rook c7, it's the same thing. You're going to lose your bishop. So my opponent has to do something now. Either move the bishop away, move the queen away, or play h3, which is what my opponent played. h3 prepares to win an exchange, because g4, g5 comes with tempo, and then knight d7 forks my rook and queen. So I had to think for a long time once again. c4 is very tempting. So if I do go c4, then g4, bishop e4, g5, knight h5. This much is forced. And then let's say my opponent does go in for the exchange, knight d7. I go queen c7. Obviously they take the rook. I take back. And I was trying to visualize this position. The line is very forced, so it was easy to get to this point. And I could see that my knight has g3 and f5. My other knight has f5. So I imagined a position where I have knights on g3 and f5, and compared that to this rook, it seems like giving up the exchange is a good idea. But for example, let's say queen d1, knight here, rook f2, knight ef5. If pieces get traded off, do I really have enough for the exchange? I wasn't sure. I'm not good enough to know that. Maybe white's going to be able to develop somehow, plant this knight on e5 and compensate for the bad pieces. Still, this bishop is loose. So if, I don't know, if white doesn't do anything, I may still be able to round the bishop up. But as I said, I wasn't completely certain. So instead, on h3, I played rook fd8. And this just prevents knight d7. You're not going to win the exchange. So g4 wouldn't make any sense at this point. So my opponent saves the bishop. If they make a random move here, like bishop d2, then I just win with c4. So bishop e2, saving the bishop. But now I'm taking over control over the game, and I have knight e4. Eventually I will have knight f5. I may have knight g3. It seems like a very, very pleasant position for me. My opponent prevented knight g3 here, so king h2 makes sense. And should black play f6? So once black plays f6, the Stonewall attack is over, because the knights are getting chased away from g5 and e5. And the main downside of the Stonewall still hasn't been resolved. There's still this awful bishop on c1. Alternatives to f6, I don't know. Maybe queen c7, bringing my queen back. It's useless. If I do go queen c7, the pawn on a7 is immune because I just win the queen. So that was the only alternative I was looking at. But I decided to go f6 after all. Knight d3, okay. And now c4 is always an option. And I started looking at it at this point, and I have considered it for the next probably 10 moves. The only issue is when I do go c4, the knight comes to f2 and trades off my really good knight. So takes here. I don't really have knight f5 because g4 could come, so I wasn't sure about this. So knight d3, I went king h8 first. And I want to go g5 or e5. And since the king is on h2, e5 seemed slightly stronger to me. I'm going to go queen c7 and break up this structure. My opponent went g4, bishop g6, king g2, getting away from the dark squares and controlling g3 some more. I wasn't sure about this move, but it kind of makes sense. You're not lined up with the bishop on d6. So now once again, I went queen c7, the pawn is immune. I could have gone c4, and on knight f2, just queen c7. Seems interesting, but I went queen c7 straight away. I didn't want to commit in the center. Rook h1, okay, rook f8. Still, c4 was the most interesting choice. And on knight f2, once again, I can take, king takes, bishop e4. Now the knight is lined up with the rook. And eventually I will go e5 or g5. So let's say h4, e5. And if this center blows open, I think my opponent's going to be in a world of pain. For example, something like this. I would have to recapture, of course, because knight f7 is hanging. But this seems huge for me. But I had decided to prepare that with rook f8. And I'm going to go e5 eventually. I'll just improve my pieces first. I couldn't see a clear way for my opponent to continue the game. I wasn't afraid of h4, h5. I wasn't afraid of g5 or of f5. So I couldn't see what my opponent should do, especially because these three pieces are completely out of the game. So unless they are developed, well, I'm playing with more pieces. My opponent played bishop d2. I went knight c6. I want to go e5, so the knight supports that. Bishop e1. Finally, the Stonewall bishop is active. And here I went rook c8. Once again, supporting e5. My opponent went knight h4. I don't want to give up my bishop, so bishop f7. Knight f2. Okay, and now it's time for e5. I'm going to break through. So I took, my opponent took with the bishop, and I went e5. This was my dream for the last 5 or 6 moves, to play e5 and get to this king. When I was analyzing the game in the bus, I came up with cd4, and it's actually not that stupid. Normally in the Stonewall you don't want to take because you open up the c file for white's rooks. But after cd4, I can now go g5. And with my rooks so perfectly lined up, let's say either the knight retreats or takes, and the knight retreats. So let's say knight f3 first. For example, bishop g6, at some point fg. If knight takes g5, I think white's losing. I don't know if my analysis is correct, but I don't think white can survive rook takes f2, because on king takes f2, there's bishop g3, and the king is completely cut off from the queen side. So after king g2, I can go either rook f8 or bishop h4 and rook f2, bishop e4, h6, chasing the knight away. It seems like it could almost be checkmate. Now I have given up the exchange, so I would have to calculate this very precisely during the game. But it seems really nice for black. I couldn't see, let's say bishop g4, and I'm threatening h6, or, well, the knight has to move away straight away. So let's say knight f3 and here. Or even queen g3 first. How do you survive this? Rook f8. I don't know. If rook g1, I can just take on h3. Seems crushing. But I didn't even consider that during the game. I went e5 because that's what I've been looking at for the last half an hour. White has choices here, but I don't think there are too many choices because I'm threatening to win the f4 pawn. My main goal is to open up the f file. So my opponent did the only thing that keeps the f file closed, which is d, fe, and f5. But I had calculated this, and I came up with a plan that seemed winning for black. e4. And the idea is knight e5, knight d3. I'm going to get a protected passed pawn on the d3 square. I'm completely crushing this diagonal, and I don't know. This seemed like it was going to be game over very soon. At least I think that black should be winning here. My opponent went king g1, which I was confused by, but it gives the knight the g2 square, which makes sense. I could have played something like bishop e7, queen d8, and won the knight. I should also mention that... oh yeah, okay, never mind. Knight e5, I'm just going with my plan of knight d3, rook f1, and I wasn't sure whether I should go knight d3 first or c4. It all depends on which pawn I want to take with, which I wasn't sure about at all. I'm still not sure. So I went c4 first to give myself options. Queen d1, knight d3. Now in my mind, this knight couldn't be allowed to stay on d3, so white has to take. And now what do I take with? I took with the c pawn in the game, but ed is also very interesting, because on, let's say, queen f3, I can play queen b6, bishop c5. Seems crushing, but this gives, maybe this gives white a bit more freedom. So during the game I took with the c pawn, which seemed to restrict white's position completely. My opponent blockaded the pawn. I went bishop g8. The idea behind bishop g8 is, there really is no idea. I wanted to activate my rook and at some point maybe go g6 if the knight moves away, and I wanted to prevent f6, which is what I was afraid of. I didn't want to allow this pawn storm to be played. My opponent went bishop e1, reinforcing f6, queen e7, defending against f6, knight g2, and now b5. I mean, why not? I'm playing a standard minority attack. If I can play rook c8 and rook c2, that's going to be resigns, because look at my bishop, look at my queen, look at my rooks. That seems like game over. So if I can play a5, b4 and open up the c file and the c2 square, crushing. a3. Okay, so a5. My opponent went bishop h4. I saved my queen. Queen b7. And now bishop e1. So not doing anything. And now I could have gone b4 straight away. And if that's taken, then rook c8, rook c2. So if b4, let's assume that white takes. Now I go rook c8, and I don't think there's a defense to rook c2. Instead, I went rook c8 first, which seemed equally good. I don't know if there's a difference. Maybe there is. I don't know. Knight f4. Okay, and this now introduces something I need to be aware of, and I had actually anticipated this threat before I have played e4. So e4 gave away the f4 square, and the only thing I should be afraid of here is queen f2, knight g6 check, h6, and queen check. And if, of course, if I play bishop h7, then f takes g6, and I'm gonna resign because that's gonna be mate. So knight f4 introduces knight g6 check. So I either move my bishop out to f7 at some point, or I have enough pressure on this diagonal to be able to take on e3 with check and bring my bishop back to h6. That's a defensive resource. So I was constantly afraid of these jumps, and I had to factor that in my every decision. But for now, the queen isn't on f2 yet, so that's not a big deal. b4. Okay, a b4, and now queen f2. Now knight g6 is an idea. And I had to calculate this carefully. I actually took some time. So if I fear this, I can just go bishop f7 and that's it. So nothing works. But I saw that I can play bishop c5, setting up a trap. Because now if knight g6, I do have bishop e3 check and my bishop comes back. And basically my opponent would be giving up a pawn at least, or in one variation, which I actually found during analysis, I'm going to be honest, I'm a full piece up. So let's look at knight g6, which I don't think my opponent even considered this, but okay. If knight g6, I take. Queen h4, I have to play bishop h7, and now fg6. And of course, if I didn't have bishop e3, this would be mate. But I do have bishop e3. And the king moves somewhere, I go bishop h6. And now on g5, during the game, I was going to go bishop g6. And I'm just up a ton of material with a passed pawn here, and it should be over. So here, let's say, I don't know, e3. For example, just queening. If h7, king g7, there are no issues here. However, on g5, when I was analyzing this, I found a crushing move, queen e7. And now that's... I'm just gonna queen. You're not taking here. I'm threatening to take and exchange queens. So if you take my bishop, I just play queen g5, and black is absolutely winning because I just make a queen. So yeah. But my opponent went bishop d2. Now if I don't do anything, knight g6 is a very serious threat, so I had to go bishop f7, of course, to prevent knight g6. King g2, rook a8. And I'm switching plans since my opponent didn't take. I want to go rook a2 and infiltrate, just win all the pawns. Queen h4. I don't know if I should be afraid of this, but I was afraid of this, so I played king g8. Maybe that's just a waste of time. I don't know. So if, for example, I go rook a2, I didn't like this because my rook was hanging. So if knight g6 takes, it's a double threat, mate and mate. So rook a2 would be losing. So I couldn't find a useful move here that does something and deals with the threat. So I just played king g8. Unfortunately, this runs into f6. I had completely missed the other idea behind queen h4, which is now f6 is possible. My bishop is blocked. And at this point, I had maybe 10 minutes left on the clock. Again, this is a 60 plus 30 game, so it's not a normal classical game. And I had two options here. Either rook d8 and just pushing through with d4 and allowing white to take, or taking. I ended up taking, and on queen f6 I played queen e7, and I thought my position should be great here. Obviously I have this long-term advantage with the pawn on d3, so a queen exchange should be good for me. So of course my opponent has to play queen h6, and I had anticipated queen h6, and I had decided to play rook b8, rook b6, and that seemed very good to me. So if I went rook b8. My opponent played g5, after which I think I'm completely winning because I played rook b6. The only thing they could have done is knight h5. And now if knight h5, bishop h5, on gh5 I go queen g7, and with this passed pawn I should be... It should be over. I think it should be over. I don't see a defense against my d-pawn. I'm just gonna make a queen eventually. My pieces are too good, and the e3 pawn is weak, and I'm coming in on b2 at some point. So probably instead of pawn takes, white plays queen takes. And now I wasn't sure. Maybe this is still interesting, and it's definitely more interesting than what happened in the game. It seems that like there's a ton of counterplay for white. But on rook b8, my opponent went g5, and now I think it's over. I went rook b6, and g6 was my opponent's last attempt. Of course, if I take with the rook, I lose the exchange. If I take with the bishop, I lose the exchange to knight takes d5. But I can just take with the pawn, and that's it. There's no g pawn anymore, and I'm threatening to play g5, winning a piece. So, excuse me, not winning a piece, winning the queen, because the queen is trapped after g5, has no squares. And my opponent had about 15 minutes on the clock and took on b4 very quickly, losing the game. And I just went g5, and that was it. We played on, but of course I'm just winning now. the queen is trapped, the knight is attacked. So my opponent, I think it might be best to just take on b6. I don't know. I would resign, but if I had to bet, I would say either, yeah, queen b6 is probably best. My opponent went knight g6. Okay, I just took that. And now queen h5, saves the queen, bishop d6. So the only thing I'm afraid of is bishop c3 and mate on h8. Not that that's too scary, I can still defend, but after bishop d6, it's not scary at all, because on bishop c3, I go bishop e5. And now my opponent blundered. He could have tried bishop takes, and after queen takes, rook f7, where if I take on f7, with the rook, there's queen g6 check. If I take with the king, there could be rook f1 check, but I can throw in queen b2. And after the king moves, I can bring my queen back, so at least I win the b pawn. And now I have to decide, and I had calculated king g7, and on rook f1, I'm simply winning after queen f6. I can sack my queen, I'll have two rooks for the queen, and I'll queen my d pawn. Alternatively, which I don't think I would have done this during the game, I found this during analysis, I'm also completely winning after king g7, where my opponent does take and I just go d2 and that's it. Queen h5, the only way to prevent queening, but I go queen f6, queen f3. And that's it. You're not stopping me from queening. If you play, I don't know, queen d1, then I just go here. And yeah, and I just queen my d pawn. But in the game, my opponent took on f7, which is a blunder, because I can take with the queen. I don't have to keep defending my bishop on e5 because I'm threatening mate in 1. And when I played queen f7, you could see that he didn't see that. He just missed that I can play queen f7. My opponent at this point, instead of resigning, took on g6, which okay, you have to prevent mate. Queen takes bishop, but now queen f5, and it's going to be mate. Bishop g3, queen f3, king h2, and queen e2 check was the final move of the game. Rook f1 mate is coming. Yeah. Now let's turn on the engine. So, okay. Yeah, let's not engine check the opening because I knew. This is a setup I had prepared. Let's go. Yeah, this is the first move out of my prep. Queen a4. Okay, I played queen b6, which I see now isn't one of the top 3 moves. Let's see, queen b6. Okay, let's look at castles first, because that was my other candidate. Knight e5, I would have gone bishop f5. Takes, and now let's look at knight c6, bc6. I'm sure that queen takes is losing. Yeah, queen takes is very, very risky. Let's just check my variation. Takes, and queen e7. Yep. Okay, so this is crushing. On castles, I can just take. On knight f3, I'm guessing rook c8. Okay, but I went queen b6. Much closer to equal. Then I went bishop f5. Wow, this is almost equal. After e4? What? I don't understand e4. What if I take d4? Oof. Ooh. This is a nice idea. I need to remember this. Yeah, but couldn't I just take with pieces? Takes. Knight takes. Pawn takes. Still knight c4. Okay, I'm still just up a pawn. Yeah, doesn't seem like a great... Oh, I'm actually giving the pawn back. Oof, okay. So that's why queen b6 isn't good. There's knight c4. Okay, but my opponent went bishop b5. I went rook c8. Castles, yeah, now I'm back to being much better. Knight df3. Okay, c4 was good. Instead I went knight e7 first. Wait a minute. c4. I'm guessing bishop takes is the only way to play. This is so much better. Okay, I went knight e7, which is out there. So it's the third best move. Fine. c4 did work. Come on. c4, g4. Okay, bishop e4, g5, knight h5. That much is forced. Knight takes, queen c7, knight takes, rook takes. Forced. And now it's saying minus 1.7. Okay, queen d1 is actually correct. Knight g3 is correct. Rook f2 is correct. Knight f5 is correct. Minus 1.8. Everything I calculated was correct. Okay, it was all single moves, but this is a huge advantage, and I still don't see it. I mean, I see that my pieces are great, but I don't see a way to... I probably have to play f6, e5. Let's see. Yeah, f6. Let's say bishop d2, e5. Takes, takes, takes. Yeah, okay, now I'm starting to see it. Yeah, okay. Instead, rook fd8. Bishop e2, knight e4, king h2, f6 wasn't too precise, but it's okay. Knight d7. Ah, okay, it wants to take on c5. Okay. c4, my idea was correct. g4, c4 again. Okay. c4 again. I mentioned this on every move, but apparently it was just good. Rook h1, c4 again. Come on. c4, knight f2. I was looking at c4 on every turn, and this is the exact line we have here. And now just bishop e4, pinning the knight. Okay, white doesn't have to play h4. Let's say white continues developing. Yeah, I can just go e5 because the knight is pinned. Oof. Also b5, queen takes, rook b8, rook b2. Okay. So went rook f8. The engine obviously wants to avoid c4, so keeps playing dc5. But both me and my opponent just missed this. Now c4 is completely winning. -3. Okay, knight f2. Let's see. And e5 immediately. e5. f5. What? This is crazy. Okay, let's just follow the engine line. I'm not even going to pretend that I understand this. Why is this -3? So there has to be something tactical here with knight h4 and e4. So let's make a random move. Okay, let's make a move that defends the pawn. Okay, knight h4, the king moves, e4. Yeah, seems very, very scary, but I wouldn't be sure that I have a win here. Okay. So I went knight c6. I still have an advantage. Bishop e1, again c4. Knight h4. Bishop f7. Wow. Knight f2. And e5. e5 is a big mistake. Come on. Okay, my other idea, cd4, is correct. Unfortunately, I didn't play it. And now g5, let's hope. No, bishop f4. I was only looking at g5. I didn't even see that I could take the pawn on f4. Okay, but g5 is good. Okay, let's say takes, takes, knight f3, bishop g6, bishop e4. Yes, okay, rook f2 is good. Rook f2 has to be good. And now bishop g3, bishop h4, chase the knight away, and bishop e4 check. The best move is knight f7. Okay, okay, this I had calculated correctly, but this is only during analysis. I didn't see this during the game. Okay, I went e5, takes, takes, f5. e4 is correct. Okay, bishop b5 makes a lot of sense because it prevents knight e5, knight d3. Okay, knight e5, c4 is good, knight d3 is good. The engine doesn't take. Wow. Taking with the e pawn was better. Okay, but taking with the c pawn is also fine. Now b5 immediately makes sense. I went bishop g8 first. d4. Okay, ed4 doesn't seem possible because there's bishop c4 in the end. So if ed, then e3, queen d3, bishop c4. that much is clear. But on d4 cd, what's the idea? Just rook c8, rook c2? Okay, that's interesting. I didn't see that. Instead I went queen e7. And now b5, a5. Okay, this is all fine. Still d4. But I went b4, takes, queen f2, bishop c5. Oof, bishop c5 is a mistake. Does knight g6 work? No, it doesn't. Let's just check. Takes, here, bishop takes, the king moves, bishop h6. Yeah, on g5 I'm guessing queen e7 is best. Yes, it is. But I would have taken on g6, I'm sure. Okay, it's still winning. Yeah, it's still winning. Okay, so bishop d2, bishop f7, preventing knight g6, king g2, rook a8, queen h4. King g8 is fine, but I shouldn't really be afraid. It seems very scary. I would never consider taking on c3 because I just activate the bishop. This seems very bad. Knight g6, takes, h6, g5. Yeah, g5 is too slow. Okay. I think king g8 is a normal human move. I mean, I couldn't really focus on anything with knight g6 being a threat. Okay, on f6, rook d8 was good. But I took equal. Come on. I lost a -3 advantage. And then queen e7. Okay, but it's not equal. As soon as white takes, it says black is better. Okay, queen h6. Bishop d6, what does that do? Rook b8 equal after knight h5. But my opponent played g5. Yeah, okay. Now it seems good. hg takes, yeah, g5 winning the queen in the game. At this point, I don't think I made any mistakes. Wow, bishop takes instead of bishop d6. That seems crazy. Wait a minute. How does this work? Takes, rook takes. King takes, rook f1, king g7. Yeah, I guess I can take with the queen. Stupid. Yeah. Okay. I didn't even consider bishop b4. I only looked at this. Bishop e5. Yeah. And now this is mate in a couple of moves. Okay. Wasn't a super clean game, but it was very complicated. I mean, for a 60-minute game, this is just a lot of complications. I hope you liked the game. I'm going to show you my game against an IM in the King's Indian in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.